We're talking about materialism, the idea that our mental life emerges from our physical brain. If you're listening closely, if you're thinking about this, I hope you acknowledge that this is an odd and unnatural view. I don't expect you to believe it, at least not at first. And in fact, for the most part, people are far more attracted to the doctrine called dualism. And dualism is an idea that's been found in just about every religion and every philosophy. It's made explicit in Plato, for instance. But I think the most thoughtful and articulate defender of dualism was the philosopher Rene Descartes. So Descartes believed that animals were material things. He thought that that the doctrine of materialism was correct about non-human animals. But humans are different, Descartes argued. For humans, there's a duality. We possess two sorts of things. We are composed of two sorts of things. We are in part material, but we're also in part spiritual, separate, mental, psychological, in some way that doesn't reduce to the material. And he made two arguments for this. And they're both reasonably good arguments, at least quite persuasive at his time, and have persuaded many people and continue to persuade many people. The first argument for our non-material nature is that humans are capable of doing things that no machine, no material entity ever could. So it might surprise you to hear this, but Descartes, in the 17th century, was familiar with robots. He knew about the French Royal Gardens, which is like a 17th century Disneyland, a Euro Disney, which had robots that react when you approach them or when you step on certain stones. For instance, you might approach Diana, and then Neptune would jump out from the bushes holding a trident. And this was done not with electricity, but with water. So Descartes knew about these robots, and Descartes asked, well, maybe we're such things. Maybe we're just machines responding to the environment. And he said that we can't be. He said maybe animals, non-human animals can be, but human behavior is far more complicated and variegated and subtle to be explained in such simple ways. And we'll return to this point later on in the course when we talk about Noam Chomsky and Noam Chomsky's critique of behaviorism, which argued that basically humans respond in a relatively reflexive way to environmental stimuli. Descartes, along with Chomsky, said that can't be. Our behavior is far too complicated for that. So we can't be machines. His second argument is probably better known, and it's based on intuition. And his claim was, we don't feel like bodies. So to put it more technically, he applied what was called a method of doubt. He asked the question, what do we know for sure, and what can we question? So for instance, you might believe you were born in such and so place. You could be wrong. You could be deceived. You might believe that the earth is thousands or millions of years old, but maybe the earth was created 100 years ago, and all the memories that your grandparents have of the past were just manufactured. You might believe, said Descartes, that you live in a world of things, that you're sitting on a chair, or there's a wall in front of you, or there's a computer near your hands. But Descartes observed that we often believe such things when we're in dreams, but we're mistaken. He observed that people who were mentally ill, who were deranged in some way, might have such beliefs, but they'll be mistaken. So you could be wrong that there's a physical world around you. You could be wrong that there's a body that you have. And this is an ancient concern, of course, but it's best articulated in the movie The Matrix, which maintains that we think we're running around in a physical world, but actually, with the lucky exception of our heroes like Neo and Trinity, we're actually just plugged into some sort of system. Another version of this is that we're brains in a vat. If you were a brain, just a brain, sitting in a vat with electrical wires stimulating your experiences, you couldn't tell. Maybe you are such things. Modern-day philosophers, for instance, will argue that there's an excellent chance that we are simulations. We are computer simulations. And so Descartes and people following Descartes said, there's a lot we can't be sure of. The things that we are seemingly most confident about in the real world can be shaken. But, Descartes said, there's one thing you can't doubt. You can't doubt your own consciousness. You can't doubt your own existence. The famous line is, I think, therefore I am. And spelling out this intuition, building from the fact you could doubt that you have a body, but you can't doubt that you have a mind, Descartes wrote, I knew that I was a substance, the whole essence or nature of which is to think, and that for its existence there is no need of any place, nor does it depend on any material thing. That is to say, the soul by which I am, what I am, is entirely distinct from body. So that's a sort of philosophical case for dualism. But as I said, dualism is also emerged out of common sense. Think about how you describe your body. You describe your body as if you possess it. My arm, my heart, my body, my brain. As if it's something separate from you that you have. Or consider your intuitions about personal identity. So typically, as people age, their consciousness follows their body. So I get 10 years older, my mind is 10 years older, my brain is 10 years older, it all connects together. But we easily accept, at least in fiction, that people can hop from one body to another. There are many comedies that involve body switching, body swaps. There are movies that involve somebody going to sleep one morning as one person, waking up as another. And we understand they're fiction, they aren't real, but they make sense to us. There's sort of an intuitive rationale to this. We don't walk out of the theater saying, I am totally confused what happened there. Rather, at least with our naive conception of the self, we accept that at least it's a possibility that you can hop from one body to another. And none of this is sort of limited to modern day movies. The most famous short story of history by Franz Kafka begins with the sentence, as Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. And so metamorphosis involves that sort of transformation. And long before that, in Ulysses, the characters are transformed. Some of the characters are transformed by an evil witch into pigs. And it's not like they took the people and turned them into pigs. Rather, it's much worse. They put them in the body of pigs. As the passage goes, they had the head and voice and bristles and body of swine. But their minds remained unchanged as before, so they were penned there, weeping. Our conception that bodies themselves are separate allows us to accept the idea that you can have many people inhabiting one body. This is how many people think about multiple personality disorders, something we'll get to quite later in the course. And it's also at the root of a view that many people, both religious and non-religious, hold, which is the idea of demonic possession, the idea your body could be taken over by somebody else. Another manifestation of dualism is you could believe in intelligent beings without bodies. If mind and body are separate, it raises the possibility you could have one without the other. Plainly, you could have bodies without minds. That's what a corpse is. But the argument goes you could also have minds without bodies. And this is, for instance, what many people think about gods or angels, which is that they're immaterial beings that can think, that can observe, that can act, but they don't have physical bodies in the same sense that we do. Finally, and maybe most important for people, the idea of dualism, the idea that you are not your physical body, raises what must be for many an incredibly appealing consequence, which is that you could survive the destruction of your body. And in fact, if you ask most people, religious and non-religious, what will happen after your body is destroyed, the answer is not, well, I'm dead then. That's it. It's the end of things. But rather, the belief is that you can live on. Maybe you'll end up in some sort of spirit world. Maybe you'll ascend to heaven. If you're unlucky, maybe you'll descend to hell. Maybe you'll occupy some other body, as in reincarnation. But the idea is that the destruction of your body need not be the destruction of you, because you are not your body. And all of these beliefs, the beliefs about personal identity, the beliefs about life after death, about the existence of supernatural beings, about God, all rest, at least to some extent, on a dualist perspective. And so materialism, which says dualism is just plain wrong, is an audacious view and should be treated as such. You shouldn't just shrug and write it down. You should grapple with it. You should worry about it. You should either begrudgingly accept it or fight against it. So why are modern-day psychologists and neuroscientists so confident that dualism is mistaken? Well, there are a few problems with it. One is that it simply doesn't help us explain certain things that need to be explained. Appealing to an immaterial world, to an immaterial soul, seems to duck certain questions that really do deserve an answer. So throughout this course, we'll ask questions like, how do we learn language? What do we find sexually attractive? How does memory work? These are questions about ourselves, about our minds. And to say, oh, it all happens in some immaterial realm, leaves us hopeless when it comes to answering them. The second concern is that at the time, Descartes was correct to infer from the limitations of material things, of physical things, that we probably are not physical things. But by now, we have a much better understanding of what physical things can do, which makes it entirely possible for many of us that we are such things. So I'm thinking, for instance, of computers and robots. For Descartes, the idea that a physical thing can do something as complicated as play a game of chess would seem ludicrous. But now, of course, we know that physical things, and if you're looking at a computer, you're looking at such a physical thing, can do exactly that. They can understand language, they could recognize objects, they could store things in memory, they can make inferences, and so on. Now, for some of these things, they don't do it anywhere near as well as people do. So when we talk about language development, for instance, we'll see that a 2-year-old child uses and understands language better than any computer around. So we need to bear that in mind. But still, it's no longer nuts to say that physical things can do all of the rich and psychologically diverse and psychologically complicated things that people do. Which means that we have to take seriously the claim that we are in fact such physical things. And the final consideration is that there's tremendous evidence that the brain is in fact the roots of mental life. So put aside all the sort of philosophical and abstract arguments. There's just tons of direct evidence. And to some extent, that direct evidence has always been there. You don't have to be born in the 20th or 21st century to appreciate that getting hit in the head could affect your consciousness and your memory, to appreciate that diseases like syphilis can lead to disruption of the will and of consciousness, that Alzheimer's can rob you of your rationality, that coffee and alcohol can inflame the passions. It just is so evident in everyday life that the physical events that affect the brain can affect ourselves, suggesting that, at the very least, our mental life is intimately connected to the brain. And over recent years, something else has happened, which is we've developed technologies that allow us to look directly into the brain, look at the brain's activation, and infer from patterns of the brain activation what people are thinking. So very crudely, you could put somebody into a scanner, an fMRI scanner, and you could tell whether or not they're thinking about language or music or sex. The technology is increasing to such a point that it's not implausible that for some of you, by the time you're listening to this, we could put a sleeping person into fMRI scanner and know from the neural patterns of neural firings, know what they're dreaming. And all of this, I think it is very difficult to keep this in mind and hold on to the view of dualism. I think materialism, however uncomfortable, however unpalpable, is a view that the science forces us to adopt.